We're live. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Mohammed Mia. I'm the delivery manager on the service manual team. Welcome to the third show and tell from the team behind the NHS Digital Service Manual. It's a day shy of 1 year since our first one, which was on Valentine's Day last year, and we've been busy. It's only when you do things like the show and tell today when you realise how far we've travelled and how much we've done. But still, lot to do. So we'll also be talking about making digital services more inclusive, particularly the language we use. We've also previously talked about a service standard for health, and today we'll talk about how the NHS service standard is now in beta. We've got Rob Banafi from NHSX who'll talk about that as well. And then we have guests from the NHS Leadership Academy who literally just arrived like 5 minutes ago, thanks to the wonderful train network that we have. They'll be sharing some work on a WordPress theme based on the NHS UK front-end library. We'll then share an update on the NHS Digital Accessibility Lab in Leeds. We'll end briefly by touching on future plans, but if you have any questions, we'll take some questions from the floor, but also if anyone on the stream, if they can just drop them into our inbox, which is service-manual@nhs.net. So now I'd like to introduce Amy and Misaki, who will be talking about redesigning the service.
Hello. So my name is Amy James, and I'm a user researcher working on the Digital Service Manual. And this is my colleague, Misaki Hatta, another user researcher. And we were meant to be joined by Dave Hunter, but also due to the lovely train network, he cannot make it today or may run in later on. And we're here today to talk to you about the shiny new redesign. So the service manual is kind of ever expanding, but last year we had a bit of a growth spurt. So within the last year, we've actually grown our content style guide, expanding the comprehensive A to Z and adding guidance on writing questions and forms. We also added to our design styles, components and patterns list, and actually surfaced the NHS service standard. So as we've said before, we'll be talking a bit more about the forms guidance and the service standard a bit later on. So as we've expanded so rapidly, our navigation took a bit of a hit. So it seemed to be increasingly harder for people to actually find the things. And it was important to us that all of our different audiences with all of their different needs were actually easily able to navigate around the site. So if you can imagine trying to find one particular component and having to scroll through this giant list here, then you can kind of empathize with that a little bit. So we decided it was time for an update. And to solve this particular problem, we looked at three things. So we looked at adding a search function to allow people to go a bit more directly to the things that they needed. We looked at improving the site structure, which is about looking at where things live and if they're actually living in the right place. And finally, we looked at implementing a consistent navigation across the site to make things easier for people when they're actually looking for something in particular. So in order to find the solutions to these problems, we conducted around 3 rounds of user research, and I'm now going to hand over to Misaki, who's going to talk through that. So take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, so to sort out the problem of users not being able to find the thing they're looking for in that heinously long list that Amy showed you, we decided to do a card sort. So card sorting is a method that you use to evaluate a site structure. Sessions normally include participants organizing things into groups that make sense to them. So you can see an example of one of the card sorts that we did here. There were 36 cards with pictures of components that this card participant has sorted into 5 groups. And we asked about 50 people to do a very similar thing in both an online and offline setting. And from that, we found 3 things. First of all, that there were some very clear and consistent groupings that emerged, and they were based on kind of themes that were forms. So that would include components like buttons, text input, checkboxes, navigation, so like breadcrumbs and backlink, and content presentation. So that's like images and tables. We also found people were calling particular components different names. And lastly, we also surfaced some ideas for new components that we might be adding in the future that people felt were lacking. So based upon the findings of the card sort, we're able to refine our search function by adding some synonyms for components that we know people call different things. So an example of that is something like the expander and the details component. They have many names, but we found people calling them reveal, progressive disclosure, hidden text, and show and hide. So now we're kind of watching how people are using the search function, and we'll be making changes based on what we see. The second round of testing that we did was a tree test, and that was to test out the new overall structure of the service manual. Tree test is a research method that is used when you want to quickly test out the findability of certain topics in your site. So you'd have a simplified text version of your site structure like this, and this is called a tree. You might then ask your participants to do some tasks that could be something like, where would you find the prototyping kit? And then depending on their success rate, you can see how well the site navigation is working or where it isn't working. So from the results of the tree test, we thought we would add a new section called Design Systems, where the front-end library, prototyping kit, and UI components, patterns, and styles would live in. And that's just to make it a little bit easier for people to find those things, but also create kind of like a natural space for any new design content to go in the future. We also found it was very important to cross-link between all of our different pages so people could find all related information in different contexts. So that's something like headings could be found in our design system section, in styles, under typography, but you can also find information about headings in our accessibility guide. So just making sure those two pages are linking to each other. After we redesigned the service manual based on the results of the tree test and the card sort, we put it through some usability tests. So a usability test is when you test a product by putting it in front of real people who are real users of the product, and see how well it performs. We tested the redesign on a mixture of content designers, service designers, interaction designers, and developers who work across the NHS. And 20% of our participants also had accessibility needs. So overall, it tested really well. And at this point, I'm passing you back to Amy to take you through the redesigned service manual and touch upon some of the finer points of how it tested.
Cool. Yeah. So now we're going to technically show you the thing, which is the redesigned service manual. So the first thing we're going to look at is like the new site structure. So we've actually implemented 3 different types of navigation to kind of help users find the things that they need. So the first type we can talk about is the main navigation. So the main navigation is kind of designed to help people navigate by sections, but also to kind of give people an overview of exactly what's available on here and what they can find. So in the main nav, you can see here we have the NHS service standard, which we'll be talking about in a bit. And next is the design system section. So that includes all of like the design styles, the components and patterns and guidance on how to actually use them. And then we also have the content style guide, accessibility, and the community sections as well. And during testing, this actually tested really well. I mean, all of the users were able to navigate to the sections without any problems. There was no surprises and no real need to make any. Happy days for us. So if we have a look at the new design system section, you can see that like the gov.uk design system and actually the majority of other design systems, we have actually implemented a left-hand side navigation. So this is consistent throughout the service manual and has been designed to help people navigate sort of within a section. So within the component side navigation, you can see that we've chunked up our long list of components, as we were talking about previously, into sort of themes. So those themes are like form elements, content presentation, and then also navigation. And these themes kind of add a bit of context as to exactly what the components are used for. So this helps users kind of make a bit of a quicker, more confident decision when they're actually trying to select a component, rather than that hideously long list that we saw earlier. So during the usability testing, again, this tested really well. So users were able to navigate around the sections without any problems. The only kind of change to that was actually the pattern side navigation, caused people a bit of confusion. So have a quick look at that. So in the pattern section, we originally followed the theming that gov.uk actually use, which is to have themes of users for and pages. However, in our context, that didn't really work. People were kind of a bit unsure about why the patterns were actually grouped that way. So we believe this was down to us having quite a small number of patterns. As you can see here, we only have 3, whereas they have 25. And maybe that didn't make sense for people into how that was arranged. We've since iterated on the theme to kind of ask users for to tasks instead, and pages has become page types instead. And that's actually kind of baked into our description that we have for patterns as well, so to kind of relate that back. We'll be revisiting this section pretty soon to kind of adding more patterns to bulk it out. We hope that'll kind of go forward. We also need to explore how we can link the pattern section to the gov.uk patterns, because they've got some really great patterns that we can probably use as well, and that saves us actually duplicating anything. So the third navigation we can show you is the in-page navigation. So we've added this to a handful of our sort of longer pages, and this is designed to give users a bit more of an overview of the content on the actual page and let them access the information a bit quicker by using jump links. So for example, you can see here on the formatting and punctuation page with the content style guide, we can actually jump straight to a section about, say, contractions or apostrophes or whatever section you want to go to, and it'll take you straight there. And in usability testing, we were kind of a bit semi-successful with this. So around 30% of users actually interacted it, but even though it was only semi-successful, we're still going to implement it so we can kind of gather a bit more evidence with live. So live monitoring and feedback and more testing potentially and more data to see if actually people are interacting with it and if it is useful to people. And finally, I will show you the what's new section, which we're very proud of. This includes kind of latest updates from the service manual, any blog posts from the team, and later on you will probably be able to find this lovely show and tell there as well. We already communicate our updates to the service manual via things like Slack, Twitter, and GitHub, but they can kind of get a bit lost in the mix of things, and the GitHub changelog is kind of very long and a bit technical for some people to actually access. So there was kind of a need to be able to present this update information on the service manual in a bit more of a user-friendly way. So this entire section tested really, really well, and users were able to navigate the sections really easily and tell us exactly what updates had been made. People were pretty complimentary about this as well, and that's down to the excellent work that Masaki and Jack, one of our other graduates over there, who designed, developed, coded, tested, and iterated this section. So a hell of a lot of work's actually gone into this. So that's it. You can go and kind of investigate it yourself if you want to have a look around brand new navigation. Any feedback is always appreciated. And as it is now live, you can go and look at it whenever you like and give us as much feedback as you want. We've even got a new sticker to kind of do this for a nice shiny new domain name that we've got as well. So it's all good. So thank you very much for listening. Also, do remember that you can send any questions to our inbox, so any feedback about what we've just talked about or anything else you want to say. Perhaps you really liked our presentation and it was the best and you want to tell us that. But yeah, thanks for listening to us. And we're now going to hand you over to Sarah, who's going to talk about our new guidance on how to write good questions for forms.
Great, thanks Amy and Misaki. So yes, I'm Sarah and I'm the content designer on the service manual team. And I worked on some new guidance we've published on writing good questions for forms. So the NHS uses all sorts of forms to gather data and provide services. Contact forms, consent forms, complaint forms, forms for registering or applying for services, paper forms, digital forms, online services, all sorts of things. And over the last year, we've published a number of forms components, so things like buttons and text boxes for teams in the NHS to use to build accessible, mobile-friendly products and services. But now that teams can quickly find and reuse approved components, there's a temptation to just throw a few together. And the forms are easy, aren't they? But actually, forms are really important. Often they are the service as far as the patient is concerned, and they don't always get the attention they deserve. So the problem we identified was that it wasn't easy to find guidance on putting a good form together. And without guidance, there was a danger that people would use the components to build beautiful nonsense or branded NHS services that look good but don't actually meet user needs. So we started by trying to identify what teams needed to know about forms design. We worked with forms expert Caroline Jarrett, who drew up a forms topic map with public sector teams. We then tested those topics with some teams at NHS Digital, and we sat in when Caroline expert reviews of some NHS forms, and we listened to teams asking her advice, and it really helped to see the questions and problems that people were having with forms. Some teams needed broad-ranging guidance on building forms, so we had delivery managers, for example, who needed to get new team members up to speed in forms design. We also had content designers, for example, who had a lot of experience of writing health information, health content, but weren't used to working on forms. We found some specific needs. So from some of our content designers, for example, didn't know how to order questions. What order do you put questions in? And we had designers asking us, how do you know which, and how do you mark them? How do you tell people which ones are mandatory and which ones are optional? And a really key finding for us was that a lot of people started out looking for components, but actually they needed to think through the questions they wanted to ask. Now, the guidance says, and this is quote Caroline, good form design consists of interaction design, which is about making the form easy to use, content design, which is about making it easy to understand and answer the questions, and service design, which is about making it easy for people to get things done. And partly because it seemed so important to get people thinking about the questions they should be asking, we decided the most useful place to start, if we were going to publish some guidance, was on the writing good questions to get the right answer. So that's the content design bit. But the guidance does actually touch on interaction design and service design as well. But the focus of it is the content design bit. We then tested the guidance with a mix of professions. We tested it with NHS Digital teams. We tested it with teams in the NHS Business Services Authority, who have a number of NHS online services, including, just for example, an eligibility checker for prescriptions and dental treatment. We tested it with an NHS trust, and we went and talked to a university digital health researcher. And as I said, we found there was a need for the guidance. And one of the things which struck us was a lot of people said, this is exactly the problem that I'm working on at the moment. So we felt we were doing the right sort of, touching on the right sort of issues. We also found that people needed some other stuff. So they needed NHS examples. And one of the examples we've included is a new pattern for asking people for their NHS number, for example. That was one of the things which people were interested in. We found that we needed some guidance in our components pages as well as in the forms guidance, and linking between the two. So you could find some guidance actually when you were looking at an individual component like a button or a text box, but also guidance in the forms guidance. There was a great deal of interest in sensitive issues like ethnicity, sex and gender, and so much so that we ended up writing a separate section on questions about sensitive issues. And we wanted to build something which people could both dip in and out of and read at length. So I'm going to show you the thing. Okay, so this is the forms guidance. And on the left, you can see we've got 8 topics there. Topics. First topic is about understanding the problem before you write your questions, understanding your users and the issues that you're dealing with. Making sure you need each question. That's very much about the mandatory and optional thing, and making sure that you keep things as short, as brief as you can. There's the topic around considering the sensitivities around your questions. There's something about filter questions to route your users, getting your questions into order, thinking of the form as a conversation, and writing the supporting content for your form. So that's some of the stuff around introducing the form, your help text, how you support people as they fill in the form and how you finish off your form, and testing your questions. We've got a section on testing your questions at the end, but testing crops up, as you would expect, throughout the process. So I'm just going to go through to use filter questions. This was the bit of the guidance which we did the most work on. It went through a number of iterations, partly because people didn't always understand what filter questions were. So we've got an explanation there, and we also ended up including an illustration to help people understand that. We've also got some stuff about yes and no questions. There's an overlap there with filter questions. How to ask clear yes and no questions. And also raising the issue of binary choices, because we recommend that you include one other option besides yes and no, and that might be I don't know, it might be I'm not sure. At least we recommend that you try it out initially in your prototyping. You may not include it at the end of the day, but we recommend that you always try out a third option. And there you can see we've got the NHS number pattern, and we link out to it in the patterns guidance. Other can be, the word other can be a useful option for your third option. And I'm just going to go through, this link takes you through to the sensitive questions page. We actually avoid using other for sensitive topics. So for things like ethnicity, for example, if you use other, it makes people feel that you don't actually care. Yeah, so we've got a bit of guidance there, and here you can see some of the other guidance that we have about the sensitive questions, understanding which topics are especially sensitive, and they tend to be the ones covered by the Equalities Act. Getting people to think about the context, try asking different questions, and explaining why you need to ask. All of that stuff helps with sensitive questions. That gives you an idea of what's in there. I'm just going to go back to the slides. Sorry. Okay, so we've got a few things to come back to. Surveys and questionnaires are one of the things we want to look at. Obviously, there's a big overlap with forms, but we want to find out whether how we need to change the forms guidance to make it work for people who are creating surveys and questionnaires as well. There was some interest in a questions protocol, which is a way of helping you actually identify which questions you really need and why you're asking them. Yeah, we want to do some more work around forms patterns and how you put components together. So we've already talked a bit about asking people for the NHS number, and there are other patterns we might want to look into the questions in health, particularly the questions around ethnicity and sex and gender. So that's the end of the forms guidance bit. I'm also going to talk a bit about making digital services more inclusive, and I'm going to invite Jean Elgie to join me for this bit. Hi, Jean. Jean's one of our content designers on the NHS website, and among other things, she's been doing a lot of work around gender dysphoria, which is when someone feels distressed because there's a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity, or how they see themselves. Jean's also been working on trans health and non-binary health, and she's done some work on differences of sex development, or DSD, and we'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes. So this is from our design principles. We say be inclusive. NHS services are for everyone. Make sure that people with different physical, mental health, social, cultural, or learning needs can use your design. And it's really important that we make digital services as inclusive as we can. People who can't access our services, who don't understand that a service is for them, or don't feel respected and included, are less likely to get the health information, care, and treatment that they need. So we've got some guidance already on help, which can help you build inclusive services. I've mentioned the forms guidance, and we really have tried to sort of pull out some of the issues around forms, which can make them more inclusive. We've got some accessibility guidance. 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability of some kind, and many more people have a temporary impairment, like an illness or injury. And we'll come back to accessibility later on. And then we've also got some health literacy guidance. So 4 in 10 adults struggle with health content for the public. More than 6 in 10 struggle once you start including numbers and guidance regularly. We updated it in August with new guidance on sex, gender and sexuality, which we wrote with Jean. And we got lots of comments on it, positive and negative. Jean and I looked at all the feedback, and Jean consulted further, and we've addressed the issues that people raised. We published another round in January. We've had more feedback since then. And so the page has gone through a further iteration, and we've just published an update in the last. This one has gone round a number of times. So I'm just going to ask Jean to talk about some of the particular issues that came up. So sex or body parts. I mean, we broadly only mention sex, gender or sexuality if they're relevant, for example, to signpost people and help them get the health information and access to treatment that they need. We also say it's better to talk about body parts than sex in some circumstances. So Jean, I wanted you just to say a little bit about why and give us some examples.
Yes, well, if we associate a health service with a specific sex, for example, screening tests for women, some trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming people don't identify with the words male or female or men or women, and they may feel that the information simply isn't for them. And that means they may not be aware that health services are available to them or how to access them. Cervical screening is a good example. Some trans men who transition from female to male still have a cervix and should have cervical screening. So if we just call it cervical screening, that's more inclusive. Another example applies to screening for aortic abdominal aneurysm, or AAA, which is far more common in older men, and a trans woman will have the same risk as a cisgender man. So it's important that they know they can get an AAA scan. By focusing on the body part, we make it more likely that trans people will engage with screening.
Great, thanks, Jean. And here's another one, sex assigned or registered at birth. We had a lot of feedback about the term sex assigned at birth, but we know that that's the right phrase for some users. So can you tell us a bit more about where we use sex assigned and where we use sex registered at birth?
Yes, well, as you know, some people told us that we shouldn't ever use assigned. Instead, they suggested that we talk about sex being described, observed or noted at birth or in a scan. We know that many trans people prefer the word assigned, and many of the midwives we talk to use it too. So we looked at user research, including the work of colleagues. 2021 census will be the first time that they'll include a question about gender identity. We decided to use the phrase sex assigned at birth when we're talking about trans health and gender dysphoria, as that is the term they use. In other cases, we use the sex someone was registered with at birth, because the ONS research showed that most people understand this better as it records an actual event, the baby's birth.
Great, thanks, Jean. And it's worth pointing out that we had a lot of feedback also about the intersex and differences of sex development, or DSD. Some people were concerned that in an earlier version of our guidance, we were suggesting that intersex was a third gender, which wasn't our intention. We've now got a paragraph about intersex in the guidance, which explains, because we found that some people needed something to define and explain it so that they can use the word appropriately. So I'll just read this out. So we now say we use intersex in some content about people with differences in sex development, or DSD, because some people prefer it to DSD. DSD involves genes, hormones, and reproductive organs, including genitals. A person's physical sex development, internally, externally, or both, can be different to most other people's. And then we say most people with DSD have a clear sex that is registered at birth. Some adults with DSD prefer the term intersex to DSD, but they may want to keep their legal sex as male or female. Other people see intersex as distinct from female or male. And so I want to just how we came to decide on what we said there, and how we've taken on board feedback.
Yeah. Okay, so I've over the past few months, I've been involved in a review of the NHS website content on differences to sex development. It used to be called disorders of development, an official diagnostic term that is thoroughly disliked by many people. We decided that an intersex entry was an essential part of an inclusive language guide. I initially based what we said about intersex on the work we did on DSD, and talked to other people in our organisation who shared their knowledge and experience when we were drafting our guidance on sex and gender. But we didn't get it right the first time, so I consulted and iterated further. We've taken on board a lot of feedback and got sign-off from DSD families and information and peer support group, and we now believe we have an entry that is accurate and inclusive. And some of the many individuals and organisations I've consulted over the past few months include health professionals, trans and non-binary members of focus groups, our own LGBT staff network, other LGBT staff and staff with an interest in or expertise in this area, the very helpful social researcher at the ONS, who's working on questions for the 2021 census around gender identity, and our own monthly content style council meeting, and which includes our clinical team.
Great, and there's not always one correct way to talk about things.
No. It very much depends on context and also the audience you're talking to, and that's why we try to make clear in the guidance that we recommend always to teams test their language that people are going to be using it.
Yeah, thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
So there is more work to do. We've identified a few other areas that we need a bit more guidance on. as I said, we want to come back to questions about sex, gender, and ethnicity. We also want to get better at describing rashes, birthmarks, and skin symptoms on different colours on the NHS website. In the past, we've tended to focus on how skin symptoms look on white skin, but we want to make sure that our health information is just as useful to people from Black and minority ethnic communities. So we're working on this at the moment. And we're now going to look at some, look for patterns, pick some conditions to work on. Talking openly about this sort of thing, it'll encourage other people to share insight so that we can improve our guidance and make digital services more inclusive for everyone. Thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Ian and Rob at this point.
Thank you.
So that they can tell you about the NHS service.
Thanks, Sarah. I don't quite feel thrilled talking about what I'm going to, but when you hear, you realise how important this is to get stuff right. So I'm going to talk about the service standard, and then excitingly going to talk about some work with Rob and NHSX. In January, we published our beta service standard. It was based on a hypothesis. We talked about that in July and February last year. And that hypothesis was that we believed that a service standard tailored to health, which acts as a guiding North Star, would help the teams across the NHS deliver better services more efficiently. We've stayed true to that. We continue to work on a service standard for health, and we've now launched it in beta. We're calling it GDS +3. So we're building on the great work of GDS and adding which we found through our user research, which we think applies to digital services in health. And those 3 points are supporting a culture of care, making your service clinically safe, and build for interoperability. And so if we talk about supporting a culture of care, caring is a core value for most NHS organisations, and it's one of the CQC's 5 inspection domains. Clinicians have told us that compassion and care is a key differentiator for the NHS compared to other digital services. And because face-to-face contact is nearly always essential in meeting the user needs in health, we think NHS services should provide a positive experience of care, help NHS staff provide a caring service, and make patients, the public and staff feel valued and supported. And it may be a no-brainer, but we have to think about clinical safety and effectiveness. We need to remember that we have the potential to do harm as well as do good with the services we design and build, and clinicians fed back that there should be a separate point in the service standard around clinical safety. We have a requirement for digital services in the NHS to have a nominated clinical safety officer. In terms of making your service interoperable, we need systems to talk to each other. Because it supports the Gov Technology Code of Practice, it's fair to say NHS technology is diverse and often doesn't share data well. An example of this may be when patient records are not immediately shared. Patients may get frustrated, they could be less safe, and it's inefficient. So it's a show and tell, so I'm going to show the thing and play with this mouse. It's in beta, which means we think it's good enough to share, but we're still testing it. About the service standard, which explains some of our history. It covers some of the points I've just mentioned and explain we built on GDS. And if we go to the service standard, you'll see it builds on Gov. We have a structure of what the standard is, a little bit of context, and then to find out more what you should do about it. So we've talked about this before. It's a pyramid of content. At the top, you have the standard, you have some context, and then you have some more specific guidance. And I'll show you that you can read this at your leisure. When you get to the 3 specific, that's probably scrolling too much, so sorry if it's causing any parallax kind of effect on YouTube. So if we get to, it's the second one. 15 is equally a good read around care, but 16 around clinically safe. You can see context, explain why it's important, explain what you should do in your teams, have a nominated clinical safety officer. But this is where it gets interesting in terms of specific references to the catchily titled DCB 0129, the safety standard for manufacturers of health IT software, and things like DCB 0160, the standard that helps health and care orgs manage the risk of using new or changed health software. They're NHS Digital standards, which have been published under Section 250 of the Health and Social Care Act. So we're drawing on other published standards and elsewhere where there's other frameworks like NICE's evidence standard framework, we're also linking out to that. So we'll always build on best practice elsewhere and reference those standards. So we're bringing it together in our pyramid of content, making sense of the standard point. If we flick through to point 17, which is about interoperability. Again, what you should do, here's interesting because obviously Gov has done a lot of good work around open source, open standards. So we link out, of course, to the technology code of practice, but also government published stuff around registers, APIs, and so on. And again, we have some catchily titled standards, ICD-10 version 2016, the World Health Organization's International Classification of Diseases, and ISB 0149 NHS number. Really important in terms of identifiers for folks. I'm really hoping Andrew will be publishing a blog post soon around the NHS number. So if I go back to the presentation, I'll move my mouse. So we split screening, but it's slightly the wrong way around. Thanks, Sarah, got there. So what next? So we've published it in beta. This is built on work of the last year or so, a bunch of user research. We'll be doing more research in the months ahead. NHSX more broadly are about to go into a consultation phase in terms of a national digital health technology standard. And both this work and the work that Rob is going to talk about will feed into that in terms of providing a united front of standards for the health system to build on. And I did say more excitingly, Rob, we have Rob Benathi, product manager from NHSX, to explain how this will be part of an alpha for a local technical assurance service.
Brilliant, thanks.
Swap.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure it's going to be more exciting than that, but hi. So I'm Rob Benathi. I'm a product manager at NHSX. Just spend the next 2 or 3 minutes talking about an alpha that we're carrying out with a number of trusts at the moment. We published a blog. There's a reference there on the slide about the work that we did last year in terms of discovery. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about both things. So we are here, as in that we've done the discovery. We spoke to a bunch of stakeholders across the NHS systems, but also out to users. When we talk about users, we're talking primarily in our first case, IT teams in NHS Trust. So we spoke to a number of CIOs, worked across NHS Digital, NHS England, and Improvement. We're about to start the defining stage, or the alpha stage, where we're going out working with some trusts to actually test what we're looking at, some prototypes that we've got around how we can help trust build and buy better technology services. So in terms of what the aims of the alpha are, it's exactly that: test different approaches which help local health organizations to buy and build solutions or services with national open standards. So that's the purpose of the alpha. We're going to be working with up to 5 acute hospital trusts to help understand how technical standards are used locally, those 5 representing a range of capability and spend. We want to understand what support might be useful. We'll be doing this over the next 3 months. We went to our first trust yesterday, Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, and spent a few hours with their IT team and their Chief Information Officer to understand how they go about procuring, building technology, how standards are part of that, how they undertake user research, and how crucially in the centre we can maybe support them to meet their needs. So we're going to be testing the usefulness and relevance of standards and guidance, including the Secretary of State's Technology Code of Practice, and also what the benefits might be if we share this information. So if we have a better understanding of what trusts and ultimately primary care organisations are looking to buy and build in terms of technology, how can we make better use of that information? How can we share? How can we collaborate? How can we reuse? This will all help us to understand how a technical assurance process might work locally and how this might work with suppliers too. So we're not just looking at on the provider side, we're looking at the central side, but we're also looking at suppliers, because we need to think about the end-to-end journey of understanding a need, defining a solution, delivering that solution, implementing the solution, and measuring that in terms of benefits. Crucially, this is not just about technology, although interoperability standards are going to be really, really key to what we do in the alpha. It's much broader than that. So things around accessibility, around user needs, security, safety, those sorts of things are all things that we're going to be testing out in the alpha to understand how trusts do that at the moment, what standards they refer to, what support they may need, etc.
So,
That's
Rob,
it.
thank you, Rob. Come again, please, when you find out more.
Pleasure.
So in terms of the service standard, as per the design principles we've published before, please use it in your work, print it, stick it on your wall and send us photos in the wild. We want to know how this kind of thing works, not just for NHS, but also for the work we're doing in the service manual. And send any feedback via Slack or email. As we've mentioned before, our email address is service-manual@nhs.net, and we'll be picking up email addresses through this week. And so now, thank you, Rob. We're going to shuffle off and we're going to introduce, I think we're going with Tony and Chris from the NHS Leadership Academy. And they're going to talk about how they've adapted the NHS UK front-end library into a WordPress theme. In doing so, showing how we're working together as one health community. So this is where we shuffle.
Hello, I'm Tony Black. I work with the NHS Leadership Academy. I'm just going to talk through the work we've been doing over the last 6 or 7 months, extending the NHS front-end framework. So the challenge we face, like many NHS organisations, is we've got the talented developers. We know what we need to do, but we haven't actually got an in-house designer. So, you know, what do we do in terms of making sure the site we produce at the end is fit for purpose? And like most NHS organisations, we ended up with 4 choices. So choice number 1, botch together something, use NHS Blue and slap a logo at the top and hope it's good enough. 2, get an external contractor or agency in, give them a wad of money and hope that's good enough. 3, we could repurpose our old design, put a little bit of bling on it and say that's brand new and hope that's good enough. Or we could find a design that already exists and use that. So no surprises, we went with option 4. And how this came about, we had a site that was ready to go. It was due for launch on a Monday morning, and I got one of those dreaded phone calls from your line manager, 4:30 on a Friday. How do you fancy changing this and using the NHS front-end framework instead? Put the launch back a bit, and we'll just do that. So yeah, okay, okay, we can do that. So the approach we take is, and I think the NHS as a whole is starting to take, is that if you do something once, do it well, and let everyone else get the benefit of it. So we decided, instead of just making something that would do for us, what we'd actually do is try and set it as a gold standard and something that we could share, and other NHS organisations could just latch onto and use as they like. The problem we had, obviously, our sites are using WordPress. The front-end library is an HTML framework, so we had to bridge that gap. So obviously, working in the open has got massive benefits, as NHS Digital and the front-end framework shows. Documentation and knowledge are all freely available. Collaboration becomes a lot easier. The chance of, you know, somebody that you're trying to work with not having the correct software is pretty slim because it's freely available. And we decided right from the start our solution should be completely in the open. So not only the code is open, but the fact that anybody can access it at any point and see exactly what we've done and the full audit trail of all the changes that have been made as well. So we began with setting up a meeting with NHS Digital and an agency that delivers sites into the NHS, and discussed a plan, shared lessons and experiences, and drew up a rough roadmap. Obviously, WordPress has already got plentiful documentation out there. It's a platform we've already got extensive knowledge of in-house. The front-end library has also got extensive documentation and a Slack channel with lots of people who are very happy to, well, I don't know about very happy, but they seem very happy to answer my stupid questions when I send them to them. So across the last couple of months, we've been working with lots and lots of NHS organisations. So obviously we've started with ourselves in the Leadership Academy and the local Leadership Academies. Health Education in England were also really early adopters and have been really useful at providing feedback and use cases, and also contributing development time. Obviously NHS Digital, and we've also had feedback and adoption across NHS England and improvement, and a lot of external agencies. Actually had a really nice bit of feedback yesterday from an external agency who delivers websites for CCGs, and his feedback was, how can I get involved and help, because this has saved me literally months of development time. So that's exactly what we're aiming for. So the idea is that the NHS branding guidelines and the front end library are baked in right from the get-go, but every organisation's got the flexibility to personalise. So basic things such as the header, you can invert the colours because some NHS organisations have a different logo. You can have a logo that's, for example, for a trust, or you can have a service logo. So instead you can have the title over to the right here. We've got hero images, blocks of text, the content blocks, all of the elements you'd expect to find from the front end library are available straight away. We've also got a primary color switcher in there so that you can tweak things to make it more unique to yourself. The code has been designed right the way along with a focus on obviously accessibility, but also on performance. So you can see our Lighthouse scores down the bottom. I'm really annoyed about that 98. So it will be a straight 100 right the way across in the near future because I'm stubborn. Obviously, the other side effect of this is, the previous people were talking about inclusivity. So making sure that our sites are accessible from the get-go. Obviously, the content needs to be designed with accessibility in mind. But if the platform itself isn't an obstacle, this is a bonus. And on the performance side of things, this helps save the NHS money in terms of hosting costs, serving content up to users. So those of you in the room who don't know what WordPress is one of those things, if you know what it is, you know. If you don't, you have no idea. So I thought it was worth just giving a brief introduction. So WordPress is a content management system, or a simple way to manage websites for non-techie types. So basically you can just log in, add content, and the website updates. Of the top 10 million websites in the world, 35.5% of them are currently using WordPress, including The Sun, The White House, Sony Music, Vogue, and of course us at the Leadership Academy, hence why we started working on it. The code is freely available, as I mentioned before. It's fully documented, and many of the agencies the NHS uses to buy websites in, and staff within the NHS, are able to work with it. So, we've got a good core audience of developers able to use it. If you search for powered by WordPress for sites ending in .nhs.uk, it brings up 4,550 results. That blew me away, to be honest. I wasn't expecting that high a number. The reason I wasn't expecting that number is because 99% of websites won't have the powered by WordPress at the bottom. So if I'm bringing up that many searching for that, how many websites has the NHS got using WordPress? So the opportunity we've got is that the NHS design available as a WordPress theme opens up lots and lots of possibilities. So it allows standardization across the board. So we've got consistent design, we've got accessibility baked in, and no longer have we got trusts and organizations worrying about device capabilities and whether mobiles are going to get the same experience. We reduce the duplicated costs of repeatedly asking external suppliers to go and design an NHS-looking website. So hopefully that frees those external suppliers up to deliver added value rather than reinventing the wheel over and over. There's also the fact that WordPress can be installed by non-technical people. What tends to happen, and I've seen it, is that an IT department gets asked to spin up a website. Well, IT know computers really well. They don't necessarily know the web really well. And this removes that obstacle. They can literally go along, click WordPress, and click a couple of buttons and have this theme active. We are going to be continually maintaining it, developing it, and acting on issues that come up, as well as adding new features. Any updates will be automatically notified to users. So it's a one-click update. Again, technical barriers are removed. And all of this combines to help us raise standards of websites across the NHS. So I mentioned there is a one-click install. This is not currently live. It's in the queue to be live, but I'm waiting on a third party to approve it. So within the next couple of months, this should be the case. You can go to WordPress, you can search for Nightingale, press a button, the theme will be live. In the interim, there is a Git repo, so there is a little bit of a technical hurdle. You need to understand Git. You can download load it and install it. Once installed, you can then customize it using point and click. Update in real time, so you can see straight away as soon as you press publish that the whole website has changed to whatever it is you've just asked to make the change of. For those of you looking at the slideshows on YouTube, there is a video demo of that process happening. So as I said, the aim of the theme isn't to be a straitjacket or dictate layout or how a website's got to look. The idea is to provide scaffolding, give all the tools that the NHS front-end framework has given everybody else to then leverage those and kind of work further forward. I could have wanted to add this in because, again, prior experience working with various different organisations, one of the first bits of feedback almost straight away is, oh no, it's our site, you can't run it, and we don't want to run your site. The idea is this is a tool to help you run your site better. So as well as the wrapper design, we've also created a companion plugin called NHS Blocks. Now this is live, you can install it in one click. So if you've got a WordPress site, go to plugin, search NHS Blocks and it will install. Don't need to be running our theme for it to work, it's standalone. And the idea is it gives you the NHS content component. So you can, if you are aiming to go towards the whole theme, you can start the work now. Even if you're not, you can start using the blue background with white text on it. And again, we've removed the need for people to understand HTML or technical barriers in there. We've added a couple of features that aren't currently in the front-end framework, just because they're features that are kind of expected and standard in WordPress. But wherever possible, we've tried to reuse components. Again, if you're watching on the slideshow, there is a video demo of things happening with that. So the theme and the plugin are viable. They can be used on production websites today, and in fact, they are on production websites, but they are by no means finished products. So part of the reason I'm here today is because we're looking for help to make it a lot better than it is. What we would like is anybody who can help with documentation and knowledge sharing, reporting bugs, adding user stories, putting feature requests, anything like that. Just go along and Git repo and add them in. Obviously, if you feel like doing some development work, we're very open to pull requests as well. So at the minute, if you would like to get it, it's on our repo. That's probably not showing very well on the YouTube thing, but it will be on the slides. And basically you just clone that straight into your WP content themes folder, and it will be available to activate immediately. Before, we are looking for people to get involved. It is open source. The power of this kind of tool is in numbers. So the more people are involved, the better the whole tool becomes. So use it, play with it, let us know where it could be better, let us know the things that didn't happen that you expected to happen, or the things that did happen that you didn't expect to happen. Log those issues for us so we can actually prioritize and help build out the roadmap. And fork it, improve it, send it back. It is child theme ready, so if there's a specific thing that you really want to do with it but don't want to touch the main thing, you can go ahead and do your own spin-off if you like. We've also got a dedicated WordPress channel on the NHS Digital Slack channel, so if you'd like to get involved, ping us a message over there. And when it is live, please could you rate it on WordPress? It makes a massive difference to how many people see it and find it. And in fact, the blocks plugin is live right now, so if you fancy going over there and giving it 5 stars, that would be amazing. If you don't want to give it 5 stars, then send me a message and explain why, and we'll try and make that better. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Mo.
Okay, doke. Conscious of time, so I'm going to try and whiz through, but thank you very much, Tony, for sharing the great work you're doing with WordPress. I'm now going to give an update around accessibility at NHS Digital. So at our last show and tell, helping teams build accessible products and services, and there's lots of best practice related to content, design, event, but there's also things that delivery and product managers need to know and action. But since then, we've built an accessibility lab in our office in Leeds. Hey, it's initially for people within NHS Digital looking into. Picture. It's important to note that the use of the lab doesn't replace the need for an audit, and it doesn't replace the need to test with users who have access needs. It's here to help build awareness and understanding across our teams to help people learn more about accessibility and inclusive design. You can try out the tools people use to adapt websites for their needs, and you can see the variety of tech people use so that you can do some basic issues within your teams. We've got a range of tools and devices in the lab, such as Windows 10 laptops with JAWS and NVDA screen readers that helps convert text into speech so blind and partially sighted people can read web content. We've also got voice recognition and activation software like Dragon, Naturally Speaking. We have screen magnification software like Supernova, Chrome Lens, Zoom Text, and we've also got speech-to-text software like Text Read and Write. We've also got hardware devices like an iPhone and iPad, which have been adjusted with accessibility settings, but it's also there for people to use voice over screen reader. We also have Android phones and tablets for using the TalkBack and Voice Assist screen readers. And there's also GDS personas. There's also glasses that simulate visual impairments, and we have the gloves that simulate motor impairments. And then there's a range of automated testing and accessibility tools installed, and that's also available in the lab. Another photo from the lab. Just want to give a shout out to Zoe, who helped design these posters. Zoe's one of our grads on the user-centered design scheme. You can download these posters soon from the service manual, and essentially they're posters about what people need to consider when you're building accessible products. And by posting them up in your working area, you can help raise awareness of the activities involved in making products and services accessible. We also have formed an accessibility working group at NHS Digital, and the Accessibility Lab has come together through the hard work of members of the Accessibility Working Group, as well as others across NHS Digital. The Accessibility Working Group is a group of 16 people representing teams across the organisation from different professional backgrounds. They meet monthly, and their key aim is to champion accessibility and promote best practice. They meet to discuss issues, processes, looking at things like developing guidance and resources around accessibility. When Sarah was talking about how to write good questions for forms, we said 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability. Many more have temporary or situational disability or impairment. And we take accessibility lab, having the guidance within the service manual. We intend to reduce the amount of effort. We also want to make more robust products and meet our legal obligations. And finally, it's just the right thing to do. So we're now near the end. Well, it's 12 o'clock, but we're near the end. It is the end of the show and tell today, but I'll just a little bit about our future plans. So our future plans are mainly around adding more guidance to help teams comply with, I can see Becky giving me a thumbs up over there. That's important because we need to comply with like information governance rules. It's a fast changing area. People have reached out to us and said, do you have any guidance around cookies? So the NHS website team has done a lot of work in this area, and we're going to look to leverage that and publish guidance on this to help other teams. We're also thinking about guidance around images in health content. That's another thing that Sarah mentioned when discussing inclusive language. And we want to build, again, from learnings from the NHS website team who do a lot of work around imagery. We'll continue to grow the A to Z of NHS health writing. So continue to work in the open through GitHub and through our regular content style councils. Build on the accessibility guidance. So we're kicking off some testing around this. Keen to get feedback and speak to users. So please do get in touch if you've used the guidance, referred to the guidance. To health, so keen to know if teams will be using this, referring to it, but also we'll continue to liaise with Rob's team in NHSX to see how that alpha kind of pans out around local spend control and the assurance process. and just generally want to keep iterating the service manual to kind of make sure that it's relevant and that it continues to fulfill user needs. So really keen to kind of see and hear from people that have adopted things from the service manual that are referring to the service manual, and we want to understand how it's making a difference to your work. So please do keep feeding back and contributing to help us develop the service manual further. You can share work and ideas with us and the community. You can get in touch through our inbox, service-manual at nhs.net. We have a Slack channel, and we also use GitHub. You can find out more about GitHub through the service manual, where there's more information about contribution and community in there. So that brings us to the end. Do we have any questions that have come through the inbox? No questions for the inbox. Amazing. Do we have any questions from anyone that is present here today? We have a question here.
Can you tell me a little bit about how the content style pencil works?
Okay, so the question is, can we talk a little bit about how the Content Style Council works? I'm happy to run through it a little bit, but Sarah, you might want to join me. So the Content Style Council runs on a monthly basis. It is primarily content designers, but from across the NHS website team, NHS Digital, PHE, anyone else? Anyone I've missed?
We've got one or two charities who have expressed an interest in joining us as well. People working on health information, health and social care information.
And essentially we have a board on GitHub that has a list of things that go into the content style guide and the A to Z of NHS health writing. And then Sarah kind of facilitates the sessions. Is there anything to add on that?
I don't think so. I mean, basically, we've got the content style guide in the service manual, and it includes the A to Z, and we're basically sort of growing and developing that. We're happy to take feedback from anybody. We're really interested in hearing user research from other content designers. And so, yeah, very happy to talk further about it, get you involved if you're interested.
Cool. Any other questions? No? Well, we'll still be around to mingle if you do want to kind of speak to us. But yeah, again, feel free to drop messages on Slack, drop messages to our inbox, and we'll aim to get back to you ASAP. Thank you very much for coming to our show and tell.